Brian signed the lease for apartment 14B on a Tuesday. It was perfect, or rather, perfect for him. A one-bedroom on the top floor of a pre-war building, with hardwood floors that creaked and a radiator that hissed like a snake. It was the first place he'd ever had entirely to himself, a quiet sanctuary from roommates and shared bills. The rent was suspiciously low for the area, but the landlord, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, had simply shrugged and said the building had its quirks. Brian was fine with quirks. He spent the first week painting, unpacking, and reveling in the silence. He'd sit on his second-hand sofa, a craft beer in hand, and just listen to the sounds of his own life. The hum of the fridge, the distant wail of a siren, the settling of an old building. The first oddity was his keys. He was meticulous about his keys. They went in the small, chipped ceramic bowl by the door the instant he walked in. One morning, he was late for work, his keys nowhere to be found. He tore the small apartment apart, growing increasingly frantic, only to find them sitting in the middle of his freshly made bed. He stared at them, a cold trickle of confusion in his gut. He must have been more tired than he thought. A few days later, it was the kitchen cabinets. He'd go to bed with them all shut and wake up to find the one above the sink ajar. Then two, then all of them, hanging open in the dim morning light like a row of silent, screaming mouths. "Old hinges," he muttered, slamming them shut, the sound echoing too loudly in the apartment. Then came the noises. It started as a tapping, like a single fingernail on drywall, coming from the living room wall while he was in bed. He'd freeze listening. The tapping would stop, and just as he'd start to relax, a soft scrape would sound from the kitchen, like a chair leg being dragged across the linoleum. He lived on the top floor. There was no one above him. The tenant next door, 14A, was a quiet, elderly woman he'd only seen once. He blamed the pipes, the building settling, the wind. He bought earplugs, but the earplugs couldn't block the feeling. The apartment felt different. The air grew heavy at odd hours, thick and static, making the hairs on his arms stand up. He'd be watching TV, and a sudden, intense cold patch would drift through the room, chilling him to the bone before vanishing. He started talking to himself, a running commentary to fill the oppressive silence. "Just grabbing a glass of water," he'd announce to the empty kitchen. "Time for bed," he'd say to the vacant hallway. He felt, absurdly, like he needed to narrate his actions so as not to be snuck up on. The real fear began with the glass. He was making coffee, his back to the counter. He heard a sharp, clear tink. He turned. A water glass he'd left by the sink, a good 2 feet from the edge, was now sitting precariously on the very lip of the counter. He watched, frozen, as it wobbled once, then tipped. It didn't just fall, it flew, shooting horizontally to shatter against the refrigerator door 6 feet away. Brian didn't move. His heart was a drum against his ribs. He stared at the glittering spray of glass, then at the empty space on the counter. There was no vibration, no draft, no explanation. He cleaned it up, his hands shaking so badly, he cut his finger on a shard. He told himself it was a fluke, a bizarre, physics-defying fluke. That night, he was jolted awake by a crash. He bolted upright in bed, his blood running cold. From the living room came a cascade of thuds and bangs. It sounded like someone was ransacking the place. He grabbed the heavy mag light from his nightstand and crept to his bedroom door, peering into the dark hall. His living room was chaos. His books, all of them, had been violently swept from the shelves, their spines broken, pages splayed. His favorite mug lay in pieces. The remote control, which he'd left on the sofa, was embedded in the drywall across the room, leaving a starburst crack. And in the center of the room, his heavy oak-topped dining chair was upside down, not just tipped over, placed deliberately upside down. "Who's in here?" Brian's voice was a reedy tremor. The only answer was the sudden, violent slam of his bedroom door right behind him. He yelled, jumping back, fumbling the flashlight. The beam skittered across the ceiling. He was locked in the living room. He rattled the knob, but it wouldn't budge, as if it were being held from the other side. "Let me out! This isn't funny!" A light switched on. The kitchen light. It flickered, buzzed, then went out. The bathroom light. On, off, the hall light. On, off, on, off. One by one, every light he owned began to flicker in a terrifying rhythm. Then, all at once, they went out, plunging the room into near total darkness, lit only by the city's orange glow from the single window. Something skittered across the floor. A coin. It rolled from the dark hallway and stopped at his feet. He aimed the flashlight beam. It was a quarter. As he watched, it spun on its edge faster and faster, a high-pitched whining sound filling the air. It spun for an impossible length of time before shooting off into the darkness under the sofa. Brian backed against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was crying now, silent tears of terror. The dining chair in the middle of the room began to rock, its four legs pointing at the ceiling. It rocked back and forth, slowly at first, then with increasing impossible violence, the heavy wood slamming against the floorboards, the rhythm a grotesque mockery of a heartbeat. It was joined by another sound, the kitchen cabinets, all of them swinging open and slamming shut, a percussive, deafening cannonade. Bam! 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 Knives and forks rattled in their drawer, a metallic shriek. The refrigerator door was wrenched open and a carton of milk launched itself out, exploding in a white splash against the far wall. Brian sank to the floor, head in his hands, rocking and muttering, "Please stop, please, just stop, please." The chair stopped rocking. The cabinets stopped slamming. The silence that fell was worse than the noise. It was absolute, heavy, and full of anticipation. He opened his eyes, peering through his fingers. His heavy second-hand sofa, the one it had taken him and two friends to haul up the stairs, began to move. It scraped across the hardwood floor, inch by inch, turning itself until it directly faced the small, trembling man huddled against the wall. It stopped, not 5 feet from him. A deep indentation appeared in the center cushion, as if a very large, very heavy person had just sat down to watch him. The bedroom door clicked open. Brian didn't hesitate. He scrambled on all fours, a primate-brain terror propelling him forward. He crab-walked through the hall, past the open bedroom door. He didn't look in. Grabbed his keys from the bowl. They were there, of course they were there. And fumbled with the deadbolt. Behind him, from the living room, came a sound he would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. It wasn't a voice. It was a sigh. A deep, cold, and utterly disappointed sigh. He ripped the door open and fell into the building's hallway, slamming the door shut behind him. He didn't wait for the elevator. He ran down the 14 flights of stairs, his stockinged feet slipping on the concrete. He didn't stop when he hit the lobby. He burst through the front doors and didn't stop running until he was 3 blocks away, standing under a streetlight, shivering in his pajamas, the apartment key still clutched in his bleeding hand. He never went back, not for his clothes, his laptop, or his security deposit. He called Mr. Henderson from a payphone the next day, his voice still breaking, and told him he was breaking the lease. The landlord was quiet for a long moment. "Ah," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. 14B. "Yes, I understand. I'll forward your mail." Brian moved in with a friend, sleeping on a couch in a noisy apartment with 3 roommates. He'd lie awake at night listening to their laughter, their music, the sound of their lives, and he'd never felt so safe. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he'd wake up sweating, his heart pounding, certain he could hear, from somewhere deep in the building, the sound of a single upside-down chair rocking. The listing for apartment 4B was, by all accounts, a miracle. Natalie and Robert had been searching for 3 months, trapped in the expensive, cramped purgatory of city-adjacent living. Their old one-bedroom was stifling, and their relationship, while strong, was beginning to show the strain of 2 people constantly navigating each other's space. Then 4B appeared, a converted industrial loft in the up-and-coming, which meant still a bit gritty, warehouse district. Exposed brick, soaring ceilings, massive plate glass windows, and a rent figure that made Natalie check the listing twice, assuming it was a typo. "It has to be a mistake," Robert said, scrolling through the photos on his phone. "Or it's a scam, or the plumbing is just a hole in the floor." But it was real. The building manager, a gaunt man named Mr. Greer, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, showed them around. The freight elevator creaked and groaned, ascending in the building's massive, dark atrium. The apartment itself was vast and cold, but beautiful. History, Mr. Greer said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. This was a textile mill, lots of industry. It's perfect, Natalie breathed, already picturing their sofa against the far wall. The rent is correct? Robert asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Mr. Greer's smile twitched. The owner prefers long-term tenants. He likes stability. Finds a good rate, encourages that. They signed the lease that afternoon. The first 48 hours were a honeymoon of cardboard boxes and takeout pizza. They were exhausted but happy. The sheer space felt like a luxury. The first oddity was the cold. Did you leave a window open? Natalie asked, rubbing her arms. She was standing in the kitchen, a vast expanse of stainless steel and butcher block. Robert looked up from the TV, which was perched on a stack of books. No, all closed. It's an old building, Nat. Probably just drafty. She walked over to the spot, a specific point equidistant from the refrigerator and the sink. The air was frigid, still and sharp, like a pocket of walk-in freezer cold. No, this is weird. It's right here. Robert joined her, putting his hands out. He frowned. Huh, that is weird. We'll put a rug down. That night, Natalie woke up. It wasn't a sound that woke her, but a feeling. The feeling of being watched. Their bedroom was on a raised platform, overlooking the main living area. In the dark, the apartment was a cavern of shadows, the city lights painting weak, geometric shapes on the hardwood floor. She thought she saw a shadow detach itself from the corner by the tall metal support beam, move 3 feet, and reattach itself to the wall. She squeezed her eyes shut. Tired, she whispered, just tired. The next day, Robert was late from work. Natalie was unpacking the kitchen, humming to a podcast. She placed the heavy ceramic sugar canister on the shelf. She turned to grab the flour, and when she turned back, the sugar canister was on the counter. She froze. Okay, she said to the empty room. Not funny. She picked it up. It was heavy. She put it back on the shelf, pushing it firmly to the back. She went to the bathroom. When she returned, the canister was back on the counter in the exact same spot. Her heart hammered a frantic, cold rhythm against her ribs. She called Robert. It probably just slid, Nat, he said, his voice tinny over the phone. The shelves might be warped. It's a 10-pound ceramic jar, Rob. It didn't slide. When he got home, he found her sitting on the sofa, the canister clutched in her lap. He tried to rationalize it. He got out a level, showing her the shelf was a little off, see? He made them both a stiff drink. But that night, he was the one who woke up. It was a sound, a single, sharp tap. It came from the kitchen. Robert lay still, listening. The building was full of sounds. Pipes groaned, the elevator whined, the floors settled. It was rhythmic. It was deliberate. It sounded like a fingernail on a glass. He slipped out of bed. Natalie murmured in her sleep. He padded to the edge of the loft bedroom, looking down. The kitchen was dark. It was coming from the glassware cabinet. He crept down the stairs. As he got closer, the tapping stopped. He opened the cabinet. Everything was still. He sighed, feeling foolish. As he turned to leave, a highball glass, sitting securely in the middle of its shelf, shot out as if swatted by an invisible hand. It shattered on the tile floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. Natalie screamed from the top of the stairs. Robert just stared, his heart in his throat. It's the house settling, he said, but the words sounded stupid even to him. That was the turning point. The dam broke. The next night, they were woken by every single kitchen cabinet and drawer slamming open, one after another, in a percussive, deafening cannonade that lasted a full minute. They huddled in their bedroom, Natalie crying, Robert gripping a baseball bat he'd dug out of their storage. In the morning, the kitchen was pristine. Every drawer and cabinet was closed. But all their knives, from the smallest paring knife to the largest cleaver, were arranged on the kitchen island in a perfect, gleaming circle, their points facing inward. We have to leave, Natalie whispered, her face pale. We just moved in, Robert argued, though his voice was thin. We can't. The lease. The money. I don't care about the money, Robert. It's just a thing, Robert said desperately. An old building, weird vibrations, something. Then explain this, Natalie said. She pointed to her jewelry box. It had been on the dresser. Now it was in the center of the living room, and all of her necklaces, dozens of them, were unclashed and tied together, end to end, forming one long, glittering chain. It was draped over the sofa, across the coffee table, and looped like a noose over the ceiling fan. The activity, once mischievous, turned malicious. It started targeting them. Natalie was in the shower, the one refuge of steam and white noise. She heard a thud against the glass door. "Rob, is that you?" Another thud, harder. The glass rattled. "Robert, you're scaring me." A final violent bang that sounded like a fist hitting the glass, so hard she felt the vibration through the floor. She screamed and threw the curtain back. The bathroom was empty, but written in the fog on the mirror, in what looked like a small, childlike hand, was one word: mine. Robert began experiencing it at his desk. He had a small office setup in the corner. His pencils, one by one, would roll off the desk and fly across the room. His laptop screen would fill with pages of meaningless, repetitive text. The M key held down by an unseen finger. They stopped sleeping. The nights were a siege. As soon as the sun went down, the apartment came alive. Loud, dragging footsteps would pace the main floor. A child's laugh, high and thin, would echo from the ventilation shaft. And then the stacking. They woke up one morning, having finally succumbed to a few hours of exhausted sleep, to an impossible sight. Every piece of furniture in the living room was stacked in a precarious 9-foot-tall tower. The heavy oak coffee table was on the sofa. 2 armchairs were balanced on the table. The floor lamp was laid across the top like a spear. It was a monument of pure, physical impossibility and pure hatred. "I'm calling Mr. Greer," Robert said, his voice flat. He was done. The building manager picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Greer, this is Robert from 4B. We have a problem. A poltergeist." It sounded insane to say out loud. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, a dry, papery chuckle. "Poltergeist? Son, you just have an old building." "It's stacked our furniture, man," Robert yelled. "It's throwing things." "Tenants," Mr. Greer sighed. "You're responsible for the unit. You break your lease, you lose your deposit. And the owner will seek damages for the full term. Have a nice day." The line clicked dead. They were trapped. The final night, it was a smell that woke them. A thick, coppery, iron-rich smell. "What is that?" Natalie whispered, sitting up. Robert turned on the bedside lamp. The bulb flashed and went dark. "Rob." Natalie's voice was a tight thread of panic. He fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. He shined it at the bedroom door. 3 long, dark, glistening scratches were descending the inside of their door, as if a giant clawed hand was slowly dragging itself down the wood. The scratches were wet. "Get up. Get dressed. We are leaving." "Now," Robert said. His voice was calm. It was the calm of pure, unadulterated terror. They threw on shoes, grabbed their wallets and keys. They didn't pack. They didn't even grab a jacket. As they opened the bedroom door, every light in the apartment, the overheads, the lamps, the kitchen track lighting, exploded simultaneously. A shower of hot glass and sparks rained down. Natalie screamed. The apartment was plunged into a darkness so total, it felt solid. Their only light was the weak beam from Robert's phone. "Go! Go!" They ran down the stairs. The air in the main room was thick and vibrating, like the moments before a lightning strike. The air wasn't cold anymore, it was heavy and hot. "Get out!" a voice roared. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound from a dozen throats at once, a chorus of gravel and rage that seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the beam of the flashlight, the kitchen exploded. Not one glass. All of them. Every cabinet burst open. Plates, bowls, glasses, and silverware flew through the air like shrapnel. Natalie and Robert dove behind the sofa, shielding their heads as porcelain and glass shattered against the wall above them. The heavy, mid-century style sofa they were hiding behind lifted an inch off the floor, then slammed back down. "It's It's trying to get to us, Natalie shrieked. The sofa began to move, scraping across the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream, pushed by an invisible, impossibly strong force trying to expose them. The door! On 3, Robert yelled. 1, 2, 3. They bolted. They scrambled over the to-be-stacked furniture, which had been thrown about the room like a child's toys. The massive industrial support beam in the center of the room groaned, a sound of stressed metal. They reached the front door. Robert fumbled with the deadbolt. His hands were shaking so hard he couldn't get the latch. Come on, Natalie wept, pulling at the door. From behind them, a new sound. A low, tearing, splintering crack. Robert turned the beam of his phone light. The built-in bookshelf, 10 feet tall and loaded with the books they hadn't even unpacked, was tilting. It was leaning away from the wall, defying gravity for a split second before it crashed forward, directly where they had been standing a moment before. Robert finally got the deadbolt open. They tumbled out into the hallway's dim, neutral light, falling over each other. Robert slammed the door shut, and for a terrifying second, the doorknob rattled and turned violently from the inside. Then, silence. They sat on the hallway's grimy carpet for a long time, hyperventilating. Finally, Robert stood up, pulling Natalie with him. They didn't wait for the freight elevator. They took the stairs, their footsteps echoing. As they passed through the lobby, they saw Mr. Greer. He was mopping the floor, even though it was 3 a.m. The bucket of water beside him was a dark, murky red. He stopped his work as they approached, leaning on the mop handle. He looked at their disheveled clothes, their terrified, tear-streaked faces. The same empty smile crawled across his face. Checking out so soon? He asked, his voice soft. I'm afraid you'll have to forfeit your deposit. The owner, he does so hate instability. They didn't say a word. They just pushed through the heavy glass doors and ran out into the street. The sound of Mr. Greer's soft, dry chuckling following them into the night. They got in their car and drove, not stopping until the sun came up and the gritty, beautiful, haunted city was just a bad memory in their rearview mirror. They never found out what happened in 4B, and they never, ever looked for a rental that was too good to be true again. Annabelle needed the apartment. It wasn't a matter of want. As a second-year medical student, her life was a frantic, sleep-deprived blur of lectures, clinical rotations, and caffeine-fueled study sessions that lasted until 3 a.m. Her current commute, a 45-minute ordeal on 2 separate, unreliable bus lines, was actively trying to kill her academic career. So, when she found the listing for apartment 7B in the Crimson Arms, a tired, brick-faced building from the 1920s, it felt like a miracle. It was a 10-minute walk from the university hospital. The rent was, frankly, suspiciously low for the location. The landlord, a sallow-faced man named Mr. Jankowski, had shown it to her on a rainy Tuesday. The building's lobby smelled of dust and old polish. The elevator whined and shuddered its way up to the 7th floor, its gears groaning in protest. But when he opened the door to 7B, it was fine. Clean, even. It had decent hardwood floors, a small but functional kitchen, and a large window in the living room that looked out over the city's rooftops. It's quiet, Mr. Jankowski had said, his keys jingling. Top floor. No one above you. What was the previous tenant like? Annabelle asked, running a hand along the radiator. Quiet, he repeated, his eyes not quite meeting hers. Grad student, like you, kept to himself, left in a hurry. She should have questioned that. She should have asked why every other unit on the floor seemed to be empty, their doors dark. But the proximity to the hospital won out over the faint, unsettling chill in the air. She signed the lease the next day. The first week was normal. Annabelle was so busy unpacking and studying that she barely registered the apartment's quirks. The floorboards creaked. The pipes in the bathroom hissed and clanked at odd hours. Standard old building complaints. She was happy. The first incident was small enough to be dismissed. She was studying at her desk, deep into a chapter on human anatomy. She had her textbook, her notebook, a yellow highlighter, and a blue pen. She got up to make coffee. When she returned no more than 3 minutes later, the blue pen was gone. She frowned, patting her pockets. She looked under the desk, then in the chair, then through her textbook, page by page. Nothing. Frustrated, she grabbed another pen. It was stressful, losing things. She blamed exhaustion. Later that night, as she brushed her teeth, she saw it. The blue pen was sitting perfectly centered on the closed toilet lid. Annabelle froze, toothbrush in her mouth. She lived alone. She hadn't been in the bathroom since this morning. There was absolutely, unequivocally, no way she had put it there. A cold prickle, sharp as a needle, ran down her spine. She snatched the pen, threw it in the trash, and quickly went to bed, locking her bedroom door for the first time. The next night, the sounds began. She was woken from a dead sleep by a noise from the kitchen. It wasn't a skittering or a scratching. It was a sharp, distinct on the tile floor, like someone drumming their fingernails. Annabelle lay perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. The tapping continued for a minute, then stopped. She told herself it was the radiator, but the radiator hissed. This was a tap. A few days later, she came home from a brutal 12-hour rotation. She was bone-tired, dreaming of sleep. She walked into her living room and stopped dead. Every single book she owned had been pulled from her bookshelf. They weren't thrown or scattered. They were stacked, arranged in a perfect, neat 3-foot-high spire in the exact center of the room. This was not exhaustion. This was not forgetfulness. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone here?" The only reply was the hum of the refrigerator. She backed out of the apartment, ran down the hall, and pounded on the door of 7A. No answer. 7C? 7D? The entire floor was silent. Defeated and terrified, she went back inside, locked the deadbolt, and slowly, painstakingly, put every book back on the shelf, her hands shaking so badly she kept dropping them. The activity, now that it had her attention, escalated with a vicious, playful intelligence. It started targeting her studies. She would leave her desk to shower, and when she returned, her meticulously organized notes would be shuffled like a deck of cards, her diagrams out of order. Her laptop, which she knew she had left open, would be closed. Then, the kitchen became its domain. She was making tea, her back to the counter. A cabinet door, the one she kept the mugs in, swung open and slammed shut. Annabelle yelped, spinning around. The cabinet was closed. She stared at it. "Please," she whispered, please stop." As if in answer, the cabinet door directly above her head flew open. A cascade of cereal, uncooked pasta, and tea bags rained down on her. She screamed and ran, locking herself in the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub and sobbing. She was trapped. She had exams. She couldn't afford to move. She had to just endure it. But the entity, she was calling it now, didn't like to be ignored. It began to get physical. One night she was asleep. She was dreaming of the hospital, of beeping machines. The beeping sound followed her out of the dream. She woke up, disoriented. The sound was her alarm clock. It was 3:17 a.m. But the clock wasn't on her nightstand, it was in the hallway. She could hear it beeping, muffled, from outside her locked bedroom door. She crept out of bed and pressed her ear to the wood. The beeping stopped, and then something scratched the other side of the door. A long, slow like a nail being dragged from top to bottom. Annabelle fell back, stifling a scream with her hand. She sat against the wall, wide-eyed in the dark, and did not move again until the sun came up. The next day, she went to Mr. Jankowski. I think there's something in my apartment," she said, feeling like a fool. His sallow face paled. "Rats? I'll call an exterminator." "No," Annabelle insisted, her voice rising. "Not rats. Things are moving. Doors are slamming. It stacked my books." Mr. Jankowski's eyes darted down the hall. He grabbed her by the elbow, pulling her closer. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You're a med student, right? You're under a lot of stress. You're probably just tired. You're imagining it." "I am not imagining it." "Look," he hissed, his friendliness gone. "It's a 1-year lease. You break it, you forfeit your deposit, and I'll see you in court for the remaining rent. Do you understand me? It's an old building. The pipes make noise. Now, if you'll excuse me." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the musty lobby. She was trapped. That night, the poltergeist declared war. Annabelle was in the living room, desperately trying to study, pretending nothing was wrong. She had headphones on, classical music blaring, trying to drown out the world. She felt it before she saw it, a sudden paralyzing drop in temperature. The air grew so cold her breath fogged in front of her face. The music in her headphones died, replaced by a deafening static roar. She ripped the headphones off. The silence of the apartment was heavy, like a physical weight. It came from the kitchen. It sounded like a heavy bag of sand being dropped. Or a body. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. In the kitchen doorway, her heavy cast-iron skillet, the one she kept on the stove, lifted into the air. It hovered for a second, then shot across the room like a cannonball, embedding itself in the drywall, inches from her head. Plaster dust exploded. Annabelle was paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated terror. The apartment exploded. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the pale orange glow of the city outside the window. The large armchair in the corner dragged itself across the hardwood, its legs shrieking in protest, blocking her path to the front door. Books flew from the shelves again, not stacked this time, but hurled at the walls like missiles. The glass in her picture frames shattered. In the kitchen, every cabinet, every drawer was ripped open at once. A cyclone of knives, forks, glasses, and plates erupted from the room, smashing against the walls. Annabelle dove behind the sofa, covering her head as glass and ceramic shrapnel rained down around her. The sound was deafening, a guttural, violent roar that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. "Get out!" Annabelle screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Get out of my apartment!" The roaring stopped, instantly. The silence that fell was worse. It was absolute, suffocating. Annabelle, huddled behind the sofa, slowly peeked over the top. The room was a disaster zone, but it was still. "Please," she whimpered. A new sound, a slow, methodical scratching. It was coming from the bedroom. She knew she shouldn't. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden. But a horrifying, morbid curiosity pulled her to her feet. She crept down the short hallway, her bare feet crunching on broken glass. Her bedroom door was open. Inside, it was freezing. The air was thick and metallic, like the taste of old pennies. Her bathroom door was closed. The scratching was coming from behind it. She reached out a trembling hand and pushed it open. The room was dark. The mirror above the sink was completely fogged over despite the Arctic cold. As she watched, a word began to form on the glass. Not from her breath, but as if an invisible finger was writing in the steam from the other side of the glass. It was one word. "Hello!" Annabelle didn't even scream. A choked, strangled sound escaped her. She turned to run. The bedroom door slammed shut in her face. The thud of the impact rattled her teeth. She grabbed the knob, but it wouldn't turn. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. "No, no, no, please, God, no." She threw her shoulder against the door, but it was useless. Behind her, in the bathroom, she heard a crack. She spun around. The mirror. A hairline fracture had appeared, then another, and another. The glass was shattering in a spiderweb pattern, but it wasn't falling out. It was bending, bulging outward, as if something was pushing its way through. A patch of silvered glass fell to the tile, revealing only a profound, greasy darkness behind the wall. The entire apartment gave a violent lurch, as if in an earthquake. Annabelle was thrown to the floor. The door. It was her only chance. She scrambled to her feet and hit the door with her full weight. The wood groaned. The invisible pressure holding it gave way, and she fell, tumbling into the wrecked living room. She didn't pause. She clambered over the overturned armchair, her hands bleeding. She clawed at the deadbolt on the front door. It was ice cold, the metal burning her skin. The apartment gave one last, furious shriek. The large living room window imploded, spraying glass across the room. A vortex of wind and paper and debris swirled around her. She ripped the deadbolt back, tore the door open, and fell into the hallway. She ran. She didn't stop for shoes or her phone or her wallet. She hammered the elevator button, but the car was dark. She threw open the door to the stairs and tumbled down, flight after flight, her bare feet pounding on the concrete. She burst out of the lobby doors and into the cold night air, collapsing on the sidewalk, hyperventilating. She never went back. She left her laptop, her textbooks, her clothes, her entire deposit. She dropped out of her classes for the semester, telling the dean she'd had a family emergency. She stayed on a friend's sofa on the other side of the city until she could find a new place, a new construction studio with thin walls and no history. About a month later, she was on the bus passing by the Crimson Arms. She looked up, her heart clenching. High up on the 7th floor, a light was on in her old window. She saw a figure standing there, a silhouette looking down at the street, looking right at her. As she watched, paralyzed, the light in apartment 7B clicked off, plunging the window back into darkness.